Warren was a reader of my Media Post and TechCrunch articles. We connected online, stayed in touch, and whenever I was in New York, tried to catch up in person. His perspective gives us insights into the thinking at Viacom as YouTube took off, what led to the billion-dollar lawsuit, and ironically, some of the parallels between YouTube and MTV. Today, he's at New York Post trying to figure out web video. So, Warren, we met a few years ago when you were at Viacom. I think at the time Viacom was, in fact, suing YouTube. Take us back to that moment in time. What's the mood at Viacom HQ when you see like YouTube come on the scene? You don't love what they're doing. Take us through that. That must have been an interesting, I would love to be a fly in the wall there.
It was a really fascinating time because on one level, you're seeing some of the stuff that you produce and whole shows and whole piece of content go on YouTube, which is not an area where you're able to commercialize or monetize. But on the other hand, that's where the conversation was happening. That's where the audience started to migrate. We had an interesting vantage point, being at Viacom and working with MTV and VH1, the music channels. We were sort of a few years ahead of it. We had seen what happened with Napster and we had seen file sharing, and it was almost the looming earthquake. When are they going to figure out how to share video easily? And for a number of years, we were actually sort of unperturbed by the digital revolution because video files were so big and so thick and no one had a great way to send it. You certainly couldn't do it through the modem speeds or even the size of the files on those old hard drives that were minuscule compared to today's standards. But we knew it was coming. And early on, I was at VH1 and we had a show called Best Week Ever that was fairly popular. And a couple guys in the office noticed clips that were on this new thing, YouTube. And, whoa, what's YouTube? There's our stuff. And at the time, take legalisms out of it, you're just thrilled. Someone likes us. There's fans out there who are taking our stuff and putting it up on this new channel. But I think immediately when we saw YouTube, and certainly when the Lonely Island cupcake clip was out, it was one of those few days. It was where were you when the shuttle crash? Where were you when Reagan got shot? It was I remember that day in the office, passing it around. Look at the clip. We had again known about it a little bit, but we didn't sort of see it until it was on everyone's email sharing this link about about Lonely Island.
Fascinating. So, okay, I guess there were at least two camps. One is the let's partner, let's buy this thing. And then there's the, no, we're going to be sending them, the lawyers.
Right.
So what was that tug of war?
Well, at first it was, again, as fans, as creators, fellow creators, and as fans, we were fascinated by it. I remember, and I want to fact check this story,
Sure.
but it's a good one, and I wasn't able to reach my buddy there. But apparently at one point, we were so excited about seeing the clips on YouTube, we actually sent YouTube 20 pizzas for dinner. Early on, it was back when it was Chad and a couple of the other guys. I mean, really small, less than 20 people, and wanting to sort of get in on the ground floor with that. It was, in retrospect, you sort of knew how enormous it would be, but on the other hand, you also couldn't conceive of it. It was sort of a duality. You knew it was a game changer, but to the extent of how amazing a game changer it was. So, we're in this interesting period where, and this early stage, there were a lot of copycats. I remember Daily Motion, which is still around.
Metacafe.
And we ended up buying a company, and I won't need to fact check this. We ended up buying a company called Atom Films.
Yes, of course.
And that became all of a sudden our quote-unquote YouTube and I think we branded it Spike, which was Spike TV, which was a men's network that has since been changed into the Paramount Network, trying to just sort of find a response. But, the law of network effects where the fans, you want to hang out where everyone else is hanging out. So it sort of was a one-stop shop. And I think when they saw, and I don't remember I should fact check the chronology, but it was right around this time people are trying to make other YouTubes that I think then all of a sudden the corporate clamps came down on YouTube.
Yeah, you also had bought iFilm for $49 million.
That was it. iFilm and Atom Films, that was exactly it. And then we rebranded that Spike.
Yeah. And when you did iFilm, that was one of those like eye-openers for me that I said, yeah, you know what? These guys are not going to put their best stuff online. Audiences are going to start wanting content, and I said we could fill that void. And as you guys kind of held out the VH1 countdowns, WatchMojo filled that void, and I was like, great, this is a great opportunity. But it was weird that MTV especially did not figure out a way to be on the platform. Anyway, okay, so fascinating.
It is, and when you think about these brands that we did represent, MTV and VH1, they're youth culture brands. So if you're going to be key to youth culture, and remember, when young audiences, the reason why these networks became so successful was they were not reflected anywhere else on the television or cable dial. These were really by us, for us type young audiences with things like The Real World and Made, some of these real people appearing on screen. YouTube changed that. Now everyone could be on screen, and all of a sudden the audience started to migrate, as well as kind of, I think, the cultural conversation, from sort of a TRL kind of based era to a YouTube based era. And I thought it was interesting that our programming began to reflect that a little bit too. Best Week Ever, which was sort of a compilation of all the crazy things that happened in the world that week, had more and more YouTube clips. We had a whole show called Web Junk 2.0 that was looking at the top viral videos of the week the same way we used to count down the top 40 videos of the week. So I think the danger, and some of us were certainly alarmed, that we were losing the audience. And you can't properly reflect youth culture if you're ignoring youth culture. And we did have corporate directives not to put new clips on YouTube. Everything sort of had to be approved. Meanwhile, clips are everywhere in the world, but we weren't allowed to sort of figure out how to try to work and market and promote our stuff on that platform.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's definitely one of the most kind of turning point moments in corporate media history, I feel, how the Viacom zigged when it probably should have zagged. Now, so MTV starts in 1981, I think by 85-ish or whenever it sells ultimately to Viacom. Take us a little bit, what are the parallels you see between MTV as this kind of iconic influencer of youth culture, purveyor of everything that is cool, with what YouTube has been able to accomplish?
Well, think about some of the most successful MTV programs. The Real World, that was this first sort of petri dish experiment of human behavior, but all teens living together. Made was another one of my old favorite series of really showing I was a teenage cheerleader, I was a taxi driver, all these real life things that affected teen life reflected again on TV. And there was a special sauce I always used to think about the power to be on television. So it didn't just help that the audience was readily to turn to it, but also the audience was and sort of want to be, I guess today we would call them influencers, would want to be on TV. And there'd be a long lines of folks pitching shows, wanting to be on shows. But the locus started to move, and instead of having these things sort of canonized in MTV and VH1 documentaries, they sort of moved over to YouTube. Their YouTube was everything. So it was not only the audience, but the stars too, the audience that we used to put on screen. And that special sauce of you could have a TV show meant a little bit less. I think that was we used to really feel like that was a differentiator, and then the audiences sort of were everywhere, the consumers were everywhere, the stars were everywhere.
So Viacom also invested in Vice. Okay, what was that like? Did the folks at Viacom look at Vice as, who are these crazies? Was that something that kind of gave Viacom like the cool factor again? And then I know eventually they separated and Vice bought back the shares, but at that moment, what was the relationship like, and how were the two companies trying to feed off each other?
Candidly, that was a tough onboarding also. I remember one corporate meeting we had. Bono was the main speaker, came out later, and Bono giving business advice. So that was the type of talent we were able to draw. But before that, Shane Smith was on with Tom Freston. And at that point, Vice was a little bit different. So it was VBS TV, I think, and trying to sort of create a separate world a little bit. It didn't feel like it was sort of programming as much as it was sort of trying to think kind of like a immersive gameplay. They had a lot of heavy animation, so it was a little abstract. And I think with a big company, it was being run out of corporate versus being run by the brands. And I think that's always challenging. We used to have an old saying called Innovation Island. Things that would be so interesting, but they'd be sort of have no support. They'd kind of birth themselves, and they had no constituency. So I think that's all we heard of it, and it didn't really make an impact with the brand levels. I think folks were open. It was sort of still a freewheeling, experimental place. We put a lot of interesting, odd, maybe failures on. We remember the hits, but there was a lot of cool, creative failures. I don't think anyone got to play with the Vice folks then, and it vanished as quickly as it came. I only literally remember that one corporate meeting where they were mentioned. Shane Smith and Bono.
Yeah, I'm sure there's interesting stories there. So now we are at VidCon, and Viacom in the last couple of years has made a mad dash to kind of make up for lost time. You know, it bought Who Say, it bought Awesomeness TV, VidCon, which I thought was brilliant because, you know, it missed out on the digital stage YouTube. It's now buying the literal stage to kind of plant a flag. How challenging is it for these companies to stay relevant and hip and cool? And do you think that Viacom has right the ship, or is it hard for these companies? Like once you're no longer cool, you know, you're just not cool. You don't regain your cool.
I don't know if you can divorce Viacom's challenges from anyone else on the television dials. And it was interesting because we were also, I forgot to give you, here's a little piece of context. Back, you know, around 2003, 2004, Viacom and CBS split. Mm-hmm. And cable had always been kind of this, you know, similar to how people felt about YouTube, I think at the beginning. Oh, it's clips and it's a joke and people aren't really programmed. Why are they just staring into the phone and doing monologues? You know, it's not real. People felt that way about cable at one point until that big break from Viacom and CBS. And then actually, we forget this, but cable was ascendant in the 2000s. It was sort of seen again as sort of local access until the 2000s. Then it was considered a brilliant business. Here you were, you got subscription money before you even spent a nickel on programming. So CBS didn't have that. CBS was all ad supported. We were split, subscription and ad supported. And it was seen like a golden age. So we were there. It was an interesting period because we got to sort of experience that upward climb where we had a lot of budget, we had ratings, we had shows that worked like never before. Worked on Hogan Knows Best, was our celeb reality show. It was the first show to break a 1. It ran for 7 seasons. It had been the longest running VH1 show for a while. We'd never had that. You know, cable was always fly-by programming. You know, you'd go in and you sort of see the lists and you could tune in, tune out. I love you could come in, come out. Finally, we had programmers who were keeping people for a half hour or an hour. So it was a really interesting time when cable, I think, didn't see its vulnerabilities because the money was good, the business model was considered good. Here, the Viacom stock was trading above the CBS stock. So I think that was another way YouTube pulled the rug out under, that it felt like, oh, cable, this is the model. This is how consumers are going to watch video programming, video entertainment.
In the future, do you think that the YouTubes are going to look more and more like the Viacoms, or do you think that like the Viacoms are going to actually kind of evolve and look more like these, you know, digital darlings, so to speak?
There's sort of still an open question, you know, even in this era, how is that valued by an advertiser? You know, does the advertiser sort of look at quote unquote professional television that not a lot of people are watching right now, but has ad rates that really haven't budged, even though the viewership has declined, particularly among under 65s, the CPMs are still the same. That's the only game in town. Whereas YouTube and online, we see the audiences growing every year. We were at a forecast this morning. You know, the insatiable appetite for digital video, YouTube and other platforms. And I think to the extent that that the business has evolved, it's sort of almost I wonder if we're all waiting to see sort of what corporate America thinks in some ways, or corporate America and business America. If they find that advertising is more relevant in a YouTube environment versus a television environment, you'd think we always had this old saying in media. We always had this old saying in media that money follows the eyeballs. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, and I think so. So to the extent that Viacom and other, I'll generalize to other cable entities have still a shot, it really, again, depends on sort of a weird valuing of their attention time. I don't know, the attention's not there. Can they recapture it? Can they do more innovative things? The creator in me would like to think so, because there's different levels of creativity. There's the high production values, locations, stars, talent. We know that has some impact. It's not a sure bet to get a hit show, even if you assemble all those elements. On the other hand, you have things that can, send you down a wormhole for hours, like WatchMojo and the lists, and that's certainly, grabbing audience attention.
No, I agree. First of all, I think there's going to be a stratification of both YouTube and television, meaning you're going to have some things on YouTube that are going to look super high-end and bigger budgets, and you're also still going to have some very raw warts and all on YouTube. And I think TV is going to try to do certain things that look a bit more lean and mean, but there's still this like the big budgets, the big access, the big events, like the Super Bowl is the Super Bowl. So I think you're going to see a stratification of both. To your point about budgets, so we've always waited, for like, you don't know who's swimming naked till the tide goes down moment. And I think the audiences are fleeing, but there is still a scarcity of the biggest tentpole events and programming with TV that you just can't match. You know what I mean? Like the Super Bowl is still, you got to buy it on TV, the Oscars and those things that we associate with. But meanwhile, TV companies, to their credit, have been building up OTT, connected TVs, digital distribution. So I think instead of the $75 billion TV market is just going to shift to the web, I think it's more of like the dam is going to break, and then this pool of ad dollars is going to flow across where, in theory, accounted for length and whatnot. But when a viewer is watching something on their mobile or a big TV or even like a screen in a cab, that $75 billion is going to spread across all those forums, right?
You would think it's an engaged viewer, right? In theory, it's an engaged viewer. They're wrapped even at the gas station. How much, we don't drive as much in New York, but when I go out of town and I'm filling up the car, you see, you're transfixed. There's nothing else to do. It's that attention.
But I think the key is more because you get personalization, you get data when it's a digital, viewer. But what are the big events that you're going to spend money on? Like back in the day, you would buy the main page of Yahoo MSN. It was still tier 2 properties compared to what you got on TV. So I think what you're now seeing with like the Zone taking rights away from ESPN and eventually a lot of programming just being digital first, I think that's what's going to kind of maybe correct it, right? Okay, interesting.
But the events still, we can count, we can count the Big 12. There's 4 big sports in North America that, maybe we'll add soccer as number 5, At some point, I'm interested in the sort of workman-like. How do you entertain yourself each day? We have folks are consuming 50% more video than they did 10 years ago. Where is that? It's the workman-like stuff I'm interested in.
But I think it's also that mobile adds all these hours of consumption. Whereas before it was your TV, and now it's like you're going to be able to start consuming content on your phone in bed. You walk down to the kitchen, you're watching it on your fridge, screen, and then you're on the subway. You come to work, like I'm not saying 24/7 you're consuming content, but that's just create that much more.
Autonomous vehicles, I've read, in the future could add hours and hours to our media consumption.
One reason why Google is so into those is because it adds all that consumption time to click on ads. Good stuff. Okay, is there any other thing you want to touch on regarding just this parallel between MTV, YouTube, and because this is great. Like this, you have such a unique because you have such a different vantage point, like being on that side. Is there anything else anecdotally that you would want to touch on or include?
The consumer, anyone who makes stuff is also a crazy fan. I bet that the folks who create video production are also watching dozens of it. And YouTube, again, so interesting on so many levels, but on one level it was challenging to know the cost of your productions, to know that you weren't getting, especially at the beginning, monetized on YouTube, and then wondering how that works for making the same type of productions. Obviously, it's opened up so many new types of programming. There was a great, we went as a video team to an exhibit at the Museum of Moving Image in New York about all the new categories of YouTube that have sprung up. The videos of folks who eat, live streaming content, the CCTV closed circuit thing. There's genres that never would have been imagined or worked on TV. At the same time, working in the TV formats and knowing that they were proven formats, the audiences were there, and actually, when you have a hit TV show, there's an audience like none else. On a singular project versus a platform. Let me get back to what I was saying. I think it was challenging for the creators. I think you just wondered from the early stages as you saw YouTube take off, what is this going to mean for the types of television we were used to making? Is the entire creative format's going to change because there's not sort of an ad business to support it, or is there a way where, again, maybe ad rates on YouTube, YouTube becomes cable, subsumes cable, things that we're talking about now with Netflix at one point subsuming being cable, we thought at one point could have been YouTube. I think just in those early days, there was a sort of natural fear too, despite how great it was to use and share and consume, a little bit of a fear from a traditional media person's perspective of what does this mean for my career and livelihood.
Yeah, so that's great. So basically, it wasn't just like the corporate suits who didn't embrace YouTube. Even people in development and production were like, hey, I don't like how this is democratizing production.
Well, on one hand, you like, again, as a consumer, as a creator, you liked how it was democratizing, but on the other hand, you were awfully concerned with, what it would mean for the network's bottom line, and hence your own job there. And we've certainly seen a lot of attrition in television employment. Hasn't gone the way of newspaper employment and other media forms, but certainly it hasn't grown. Independent production has grown wildly. Someone is making all this shows where never have made more video in the entire history of the world than we are now. But that type of professional production, that classic television broadcast production, although, Netflix is spending $12 billion. I can't say that either. I think it's just moving. It's just a different type of role. You once had maybe a corporate job, and now you're a freelance producer. You're still making things, but your world is a little bit different.
Yeah, one thing the internet has done is it exposed how inefficient a lot of these industries were. And some of these companies in media especially, there was a lot of roles that had become plush and really high paying, and you kind of realize, well, you don't need all these people to do all these tasks. And yeah, I think what you're seeing is Netflix is fueled by debt, but then investors in its stock are encouraging it to take these risks, but it's not like the Viacoms or the News Corps are necessarily have that same reality where they could just spend whatever that they want and investors are just going to say, hey, keep losing money, it's all good, right? So I think there is that element of disruption or not having the baggage that Netflix can take some of those risks. But whether or not it's a house of cards or not remains to be seen.
Right, but then even Netflix is being aped by Amazon, being aped by Apple. I mean, if you really love making television and video, it's probably a great time. As I think, as long as you're not like a suit, it's the suits of
provided you.
But I don't want to portray myself as a suit. I felt I was like a scrappy producer, but yeah, I was lucky enough to be at the network at the right time.
I think you just have to be more entrepreneurial.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Cool. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Really
Thank you.